I used to be the woman who planned dinners, remembered anniversaries, and smiled through every company event. Richard liked order, and I gave him that. I didn't mind, until I noticed he no longer looked at me during dinner. No longer said goodnight. I don't remember when the silences became louder than the arguments, but I do remember the first time I suspected he was seeing someone else. It was the perfume, something cheap and young, cloying, lingering on his coat. When I asked about it, he said a client hugged him. Then he asked me why I was snooping. That was 3 months ago. I didn't say anything else after that. I started writing things down instead. Receipts, sudden changes in his schedule, phone calls taken in the garage. Little things that, if you squinted, looked innocent. But I stopped squinting. Still, I never expected to open the door that Thursday afternoon and find her there. She looked barely 30. Tan, tight jeans, white teeth that looked just a little too perfect. Her lipstick matched her nails, and both were bright red. "Hi, I'm Kendra," she chirped, like we were already friends. "Richard said you'd be surprised." I was. But not for the reason she thought. She brushed past me like she owned the place, her suitcase wheels dragging on my polished floors. "We're moving in. He told you, right? That you'd be leaving?" I didn't respond. I just looked past her, at the figure standing behind her in the rain. Dry under a black umbrella, tailored coat, calm expression. My lawyer, Paul Danner. "Actually," I said, "he did tell me. Just not in the way you think." Kendra blinked. I smiled, and Paul stepped inside. Paul's shoes left faint trails of rainwater on the hardwood floor, but neither of us cared. Kendra had stopped in the middle of the hallway, her perfect smile stiffening, her suitcase handle still in her hand. "Wait, who is he?" she asked, glancing between us. "My attorney," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "I'm sure you'll be seeing quite a bit of him." Kendra blinked rapidly, confused. "I thought Richard said you'd already—" "I haven't left," I said, cutting her off gently. "And I don't intend to, not until things are settled properly." Paul handed me the folder we had been refining for weeks. Inside, financial statements, hidden account summaries, real estate documents Richard thought I didn't understand, and an affidavit from a private investigator, photos included. Paul didn't need to say anything. He just stood beside me like a silent pillar. Kendra frowned. "You hired a lawyer? Are you suing him or something?" "I'm divorcing him," I said, finally saying it out loud. It tasted like freedom and dust. I expected Kendra to backpedal, maybe leave. She didn't. She crossed her arms and said, "Well, that doesn't mean he can't live here. He told me this house was already his." It wasn't the first time Richard had told someone a half-truth to get what he wanted. I remember when we were first married, he'd talked his way out of a contract dispute by charming an older widow into understanding the mistake. I admired it once. Now I just saw it for what it was. "This house is in both our names," I said, "and there's a clause in the prenuptial agreement. Did he forget to mention that?" She looked at Paul. Paul nodded. Her jaw tightened. That night, after she left, without the suitcase, Richard came home late, reeking of cologne and wine. He didn't even ask how my day was. Just walked to the kitchen, poured a drink, and asked, "Why was Paul here?" I turned to face him. "Because you forgot who I am." Richard always believed that silence was weakness. That's why he talked so much in meetings, gave long speeches at charity dinners, and interrupted people in conversations, especially women. But I've learned over the years that silence is often the most dangerous tool in a woman's arsenal. The next morning, I found him already in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had changed. Not a word about Kendra, not even a flicker of guilt. "I assume you're done trying to play games," he said, without looking up from his phone. I sat across from him, folded my hands, and simply asked, "Which ones do you mean? The ones you're playing, or the ones I'm done tolerating?" He blinked and finally looked at me. "So this is how it's going to be?" "No, Richard. This is how it already is." Over the next few days, the mask began to slip. He started coming home later. His tone shifted, colder, clipped. He stopped pretending to be the victim and started treating me like an opponent. I noticed calls from unknown numbers. I saw how he'd retreat to his office and shut the door for hours. I didn't ask. I just documented. Paul and I met twice that week. He was meticulous, but not just professionally. He seemed to care. "You've been protecting him for so long," he said once. "It's time to protect yourself." We went over everything again. The financial transfers Richard had tried to bury under shell companies, the joint accounts he'd quietly drained, the properties purchased under aliases I wasn't meant to notice, but I had, and Paul made sure they were all logged and notarized. Then there was Kendra. She came back the following Friday. Alone this time, but emboldened. "I'm not here to fight," she said, "but you're being selfish." That word, selfish, nearly made me laugh. Me? Selfish? "You know," she added, "he said you were different once, that you were warm, fun, but now, well, look at you." I didn't answer. I just handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" "An official notice. You're not allowed back here without my permission." Her smile faded. "This isn't over." "No," I said. "It's just finally starting." It took him 3 more days to make his move. On Tuesday, I found a notice taped to the front gate. An eviction notice, signed not by a judge, but by a lawyer I'd never heard of. Richard had filed a claim to assume sole ownership of the house, citing mental distress and emotional instability on my part. He claimed I was interfering with his life transition and creating a hostile environment. I stood at the gate and read it 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked inside, scanned the letter, and emailed it to Paul with the subject line, "Richard's next move." His reply came 5 minutes later. "Don't worry, it's toothless. Let him think he's winning." That night, Richard didn't come home. I didn't bother asking where he was. Instead, I went upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the end of our bed. Inside were 3 decades of my life. Old photo albums, handwritten letters, our children's baby clothes. He hadn't asked about any of it. Not once. It was like I'd been archived. Paul called me the next morning. "He's trying to get ahead of the divorce proceedings," he explained. "He thinks if he files first, he'll control the narrative." I knew that tactic. Richard always believed perception mattered more than truth. I'd seen him sell homes with crumbling foundations by repainting the exterior and lighting a few candles. The buyer never checked underneath. "He's bluffing," I said. "He is," Paul agreed. "But that doesn't mean we ignore it. We'll file for a protective injunction and submit a formal response, and we'll do it by the end of the day." Later that afternoon, I found a voicemail from Kendra on our home phone. I hadn't realized she still had the number. "He told me you were dangerous, Helen, that you were unwell, that he's afraid you'll hurt yourself, or him." I sat on the edge of the couch and listened to it twice. I could almost hear her trying to convince herself. He was poisoning the well. And suddenly, I saw the next chapter unfolding. This wasn't just a divorce. He wanted to erase me. On Friday morning, Paul filed for an injunction blocking Richard from taking further action on the house until the court reviewed our documents. It was a small victory, but it gave me something I hadn't had in weeks. Time. Time to think. Time to remember who I had been before Richard rewrote me as a liability. I started making lists, not legal ones, personal ones. The things I'd given up for him, the friends I lost touch with, the promotions I passed on to be a supportive wife, the vacations I didn't take because we needed to be practical. Each memory a thread, and when I pulled them, they led somewhere deeper. Not to anger, at least not right away, but to grief. Grief for the version of me I buried to become his shadow. Richard's next move came faster than I expected. A letter from his lawyer, claiming I had erratic behavior and refused counseling, accompanied by a few conveniently edited email screenshots. He attached a short declaration from Kendra, swearing she'd seen disturbing outbursts and unprovoked threats. Paul didn't flinch. "They're baiting you," he said. "They want you to react emotionally so they can use it." I nodded, but something inside me cracked. Not loudly, but enough that I had to excuse myself and walk into the garden just to breathe. Later that evening, as I watered the hydrangeas, I noticed a car parked across the street. Same car as the day before. Tinted windows. No movement. I wasn't imagining it. I called Paul. "He's trying to intimidate you," he said. "Or he hired someone to rattle you." "Let him try," I said, quieter than I felt. Still, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed we once shared, listening to the silence of a house I had once called safe. And then I decided I would no longer simply defend. I would speak. I called a journalist I used to know, a woman named Marlene. We weren't close anymore, but she remembered me. "Do you want the truth?" I asked her. "I always do," she said. Marlene came by the next afternoon. She was older than I remembered, so was I. But her eyes were the same. Sharp, focused, never missing anything. She didn't take notes at first. She just sat across from me in the sunroom and let me speak. I told her about the affair, about the eviction notice, about the smear tactics, about how the man I married had turned into a stranger with a lawyer and a playbook. I showed her the documents, the surveillance car, the fake screenshots. She didn't interrupt until I said one word: invisible. "That's how I felt," I said. "Like I never mattered, like everything I built just disappeared." Marlene's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "That's exactly how they do it. They strip you of the story first, then the rest is easy." She asked if I was sure that going public could get ugly, that Richard might retaliate even harder. I didn't hesitate. Let him try. By the end of the week, her article was written, pending final approval. She let me read it. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about women who outgrow silence, about dignity stolen behind gated driveways, about how money and charm can mask cruelty when no one's watching. Paul reviewed it and made a few legal adjustments. It's clean, careful, nothing slanderous. On Monday morning, Richard was served with a formal restraining order request on grounds of harassment, defamation, and intimidation. I hadn't expected it to shake him, but it did. He showed up on the doorstep that evening, uninvited, his smile forced. "Helen, this is all a misunderstanding. We're both emotional right now. Let's not drag this out." I stood between him and the doorframe, unmoved. "You already dragged it, Richard. I'm just cleaning up after you." His eyes narrowed. "You think some sad little story in the paper will change anything? I don't need to change the world, just the version you're trying to sell." He left without another word. 2 hours later, I received a message from an unknown number. "Careful what you say. Accidents happen." I stared at it for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Paul and Marlene, and I went to bed with the doors locked. The article went live the next morning. It didn't use names. Marlene had been careful about that, but anyone who knew us would recognize the story. A wife erased, a husband admired in public but dangerous in private. It wasn't just about Richard. It was about power, control, survival in silence. By noon, I'd received 4 messages from old friends. Women I hadn't spoken to in years. They weren't asking questions. They were offering support. "I saw the article. I always wondered." "I believe you. You're not alone." That night, Richard called. I let it go to voicemail. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. "You want to ruin my reputation? Don't think for a second I won't respond." Then, softer, "We can still fix this. You just need to back down." I blocked the number. 2 days later, Paul called. "Richard's filed a formal defamation complaint against the article. He's trying to force Marlene to take it down." "Will it work?" I asked. "No, we've reviewed everything. It's solid." But still, the pressure increased. Someone keyed my car while it sat parked in the driveway. I received a call from my credit card company. Someone had attempted to open 3 new accounts in my name. The surveillance car returned. It was no longer hiding. I began sleeping with a chair wedged under the doorknob. Paranoid? Maybe. But Paul didn't think so. "We'll ask for a security order," he said. "You're being targeted." Kendra resurfaced too. I caught her standing across the street one afternoon, smoking, arms folded, just watching the house. When she noticed me through the window, she smiled and didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I lifted my phone and took a photo. That night, I emailed everything to Paul and Marlene again. Photos, voicemails, screenshots. Marlene responded immediately. "Helen, this is no longer just a divorce. This is harassment, possibly criminal intimidation." She was right. And yet, beneath the fear, I felt something else. I felt awake. Richard had built his world on control, but it was cracking, and I was going to make sure it collapsed, brick by lying brick. I started locking everything, drawers, cabinets, even the filing box in the closet. Paranoia, maybe, but Paul said it was smart. He was right. That week, Richard stopped pretending. I received a letter from his lawyer claiming Richard intended to pursue full financial compensation for emotional distress caused by public defamation. Attached was a thinly veiled threat: drop the restraining order or prepare for a public countersuit. Paul laughed when he read it. He's bluffing. The last thing he wants is discovery under oath. Still, it wasn't the lawsuit that unsettled me. It was what I found under my pillow that evening: a single printout of Marlene's article, neatly folded, with the words, "You should be careful what you wish for," scribbled in red pen across the top. I hadn't told anyone where I kept my printed copy, which meant someone had been in the house. We checked the locks. No signs of forced entry. Paul sent someone to install a full security system the next morning. Kendra vanished after that. No more sightings, no voicemails, nothing. That should have been a relief, but instead, the silence stretched like a wire, tight, sharp, ready to snap. One evening, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't Richard. It was a woman. Late 40s. Nervous, thin-lipped. Her name was Denise. She was quiet at first, hesitant, but finally said, "I used to be his assistant. Years ago. I saw the article. I recognized everything." She sat at my kitchen table and poured out a story I hadn't expected, of emotional manipulation, lies, unpaid wages, and a forced NDA. Richard had ruined her professional reputation when she tried to leave. He was charming in public, she said, but when no one was watching, he became something else. She handed me an envelope. Inside were old emails, notes, and a flash drive. "He always thought no one would believe me," she whispered. "But I believe you." When she left, I sat in the quiet for a long time, holding her envelope like it was made of glass. It was no longer just my story. It never had been. Paul spent hours combing through the files Denise had brought. There were email chains, payment records, calendar invites Richard had deleted from shared drives years ago. One folder even contained correspondence with someone who specialized in discrete asset transfers, confirmation of the offshore accounts we suspected but hadn't yet proved. "This is gold," Paul said, his voice low with restrained excitement. "He's going to panic when he realizes you have this." And he did. That Thursday, Richard filed a motion to freeze our shared accounts, claiming I was financially unstable and reckless. Paul had anticipated it and blocked it within hours. Then came the subpoena attempt. He wanted access to my medical records. "He's playing every dirty card he has left," Paul muttered. I nodded, numb. Not surprised, just exhausted. But the exhaustion broke the moment I realized something. He was reacting. For the first time in decades, Richard was responding to me, not the other way around. Marlene wanted to run a follow-up piece now that Denise had agreed to go on record. "We can anonymize her," she offered. "But she says no. She wants her name out there. She's done being afraid." I called Denise to thank her. She sounded different, stronger. "He took too much from too many people," she said. "It's time someone took something back." That same night, as I was folding laundry upstairs, my doorbell rang. Kendra. She stood on the porch, alone, looking nothing like the confident girl who once dragged a suitcase across my floor. Her makeup was smeared, her posture nervous. "I don't want trouble," she said. "But I think he's going to hurt someone. He's been drinking. He's been saying things." I didn't let her in. But I listened. "He's unraveling, and I thought you should know. He said if you don't back off, he'll make sure nobody hears from you again." I thanked her and closed the door. I didn't call Paul right away. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from clarity. This was the last act, the final cornered threat of a man who'd spent his life controlling others. But the walls were closing in, and this time, I wasn't the one behind them. The court date was set, not for the divorce, though that would follow. This was bigger, a formal hearing for the restraining order supported by Denise's testimony, Marlene's article, and Kendra's sworn statement, which she agreed to give after our talk. She didn't want to be a victim anymore. I understood. The courtroom was colder than I expected, like most public places built to feel sterile. Richard sat across the aisle with a new attorney, young, slick, clearly briefed on charm and optics. Richard didn't look at me once. Paul was calm, as always. "You've already done the hardest part," he said. "Now let's finish it." The judge listened intently. Denise spoke first. She didn't tremble. She detailed everything, how he'd ruined her reputation, withheld pay, fabricated rumors when she tried to leave. Her voice was steady, her truth undeniable. Then came Kendra. Her voice cracked at first, but she pushed through. "He lied to both of us. I didn't know what he was capable of until it was too late." Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, not in apology, but in solidarity. Then it was my turn. I spoke plainly. No theatrics. I told the court about the threats, the false claims, the pattern of erasure. I handed over the envelope from under the pillow, the surveillance photos, the voicemails, each item a nail in the coffin of the story he'd tried to rewrite. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge took a moment before responding. Her tone was measured but firm. "Given the documentation, testimonies, and pattern of behavior, this court grants a permanent restraining order. Further, the evidence presented today may be subject to criminal review, pending further investigation." Richard's lawyer stiffened. Richard's face paled. For the first time, he looked small. Outside, in the sunlight, Paul exhaled. "You just took down a man who never thought he could lose." "I didn't win to destroy him," I said. "I won to stop disappearing." Back at home, I opened all the windows. The air smelled clean, free. I took down the last photograph of us from the wall, not out of bitterness, but closure. I packed it in a box, labeled it past, and slid it onto a shelf in the garage. The house was quiet. Not empty, just mine.